Now make a start. So if you can find your seats, that'll be fantastic. We also have our event being live streamed. The address is livestream, one word, .com/GSAPP. It's livestream.com/GSAPP. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Urban Design Symposium Beyond the Studio. This past April, our urban design program suffered a tragic loss. Professor Mojdeh Baratloo, who taught many generations of urban designers, who has become one of the prominent figures in the program, has passed away. This year's symposium touches on a few initiatives, approaches, and collaborations that Mojdeh spearheaded over the last few years. With the hope of celebrating her legacy and charting the new way and new exciting ideas in urban design, we set up this symposium. I'm Dongsei Kim, one of the faculty members in the urban design program here at Columbia University that Professor Mojdeh Baratloo taught for many years. I was also her student, her TA, a research fellow, and taught the last semester that she taught last year here at Columbia University. More importantly, she was encouraging mentor with incredible amount of energy and generosity, especially for me. So this is a world map that shows the global teaching footprint of Mojdeh. And as you can see, it's an extensive map. And many of you are part of this whole network. First of all, thank you for joining us today in this very special day to celebrate not only Professor Mojdeh Baratloo's life and work, but to celebrate the incredible impact and influence she had on so many of us. Thank you to all the people, all the incredible people who made this symposium possible. The symposium, exhibition, and publication. It's a lot of work that goes into these events. Although I cannot name all the names, I will bring up few who were instrumental in putting this tremendous effort together. I would like to thank GSAPP for supporting this event. Daniel Smoller, David Hinkle, Gavin Browning, John Romolo were critical in making this happen. I would like to also thank Fatou Daye, who is also unable to join us as she is in Rwanda, who set up the initial part of the event. I would also like to thank the faculty and administration of Parsons, the new school for design, for working with us, especially on the exhibition part where it will be part of their exhibition in 2014. On my end, in organizing this event, I would like to thank Richard Plunz and Justin Moore, who were immensely helpful in formulating the event. I would also like to thank Nickie and Bless Yi, who deserves a huge thank in supporting and also setting up the whole exhibition in such a short amount of time. And thank you to our wonderful urban design DATAs who are helping out today, throughout the day. Especially Crystal, Olivia, and Huang, who has assisted me with all the graphic materials. I would also like to thank Altman, who has worked on this with me. And finally, I would like to thank all the speakers who have agreed to talk and who have also traveled very far. And thank you for all joining us in this very special event. So now I would like to briefly introduce you to the overall structure of the day and introduce our moderators before I hand it over to Richard Plunz. We have here three events: the symposium, the exhibition opening, and the book launch. In the symposium, we have three panels. They're titled Interdisciplinary Collaborations, Pedagogical Approaches, and Innovative Discourses. We'll have a short break after panel 2. This is where you will also see more of these short reflections that you have seen or have read in the back of the program. So many of these are from people who wanted to make it to the event but wasn't able to make it here in person. Now I would like to introduce our moderators. Casey Jones. He is a former faculty member here at GSAPP at Columbia University and also a design administrator, and also Justin Moore, who is teaching with me in the urban design program, who is coordinating the urban design studio, and also a senior urban designer at New York City's Department of City Planning. So the moderators will introduce the panel topic and the speakers, and then each panel members will present for 10 minutes, followed by overall discussion. And at the end of the 3 panel discussions, we'll have overall discussions and brief remark also made from Professor Mojdeh Baratloo's daughter, Hale, who was able to join us today. And then we'll have more open talk and open it up to the audience. There's a bit of a change in the later part of the program where the opening, reception, and the book launch, the remarks will be actually made in this room rather than upstairs. The time, 4:30, will be the same, but we'll be having it here, and then you will be moving up to see the exhibition, which includes 89 projects from 50 sites spanning 21 years of Mojdeh's teaching. And you can also pick up a complimentary copy of the Rebooting Urban Design book that Mojdeh worked on in her later years. So finally, I would just like to thank all the friends and family members who have traveled so far to join us today. And I hope you have a memorable day today. It certainly will be one to remember for me. Thank you, Mojdeh, for bringing us all together today, and thank you for joining us. And I'll introduce Richard Plunz to join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dongsei, who, of course, put an extraordinary amount of effort into this. And thank you for all coming. Looks like a lot of familiar faces here. Yeah, you'll have to bear with me. I've been spared from this kind of thing till now. And I'll try to get through this. I wrote it down. Usually I don't read anything in public, but I thought I'd better do this. So, when I sat down to write this, I was reminded of, I don't know if you know, Willem Flusser is an extraordinary Czech philosopher, no longer with us, but he once said, "We survive in the memory of others," and I think it's our task, of course, to remember many things. So I've extracted 3 memories of Mojdeh, and I'll kind of indulge you with these. It's a kind of capsule, I guess. Memory 1 is Storefront 1982. Storefront stories are my favorites. I met Mojdeh in 1982 when Storefront for Art and Architecture had just been founded by Kyung Park and then joined by Shirin Nishat. It was at 51 Prince Street. It was a tiny storefront. It actually wasn't a storefront. It was like a display window of some sort. And I had a loft nearby on Broadway. I don't know how Mojdeh found me. But anyway, there I was. I was recruited to be on the board of directors together with Mojdeh, Cliff, and several other characters who I remember fondly. And of course, she and Kyung had studied together in Michigan. So Mojdeh was good at finding people, as you probably have understood. I mean, she played a pivotal role at Storefront and probably never properly remembered. So I'm going to fill in the blanks here in my few remarks. Soho was very different then. We had quite a time of it, I think for about 15 years. And at that time, Storefront was the only place in New York for architecture. There was one other gallery, Max Protech was doing some things, but other than that, not much. I guess, you know, by the mid-90s, its success kind of made it vulnerable to a whole different sensibility, so we all left the scene. We disappeared, and Storefront's quite a different thing today. But I still remember those days with a lot of pleasure, the kind of immediacy, energy, improvisation of it all. Like the decision in 1986 to move Storefront, that was a huge discussion. And Moji was right in the middle of it, of course. We had no money. We couldn't figure out if we could even meet the rent for another place, even though that rent was almost nothing. I think it was something like $90 a month, something like that. Soho was different then. But we moved there anyway. And that was a great space, that Kenmare Triangle. Of course, Storefront is still there. And in many ways, Moji spearheaded keeping it full. I mean, she had more ideas about things. Well, Keong and Shaaban were pretty good as well. But more than anything, I guess I see her as a curator. I mean, an impresario of people, ideas, things, places, you name it. And a team player, except if you got a little bit on the wrong side, then things got a little rough, but okay. If the directors were the support group for Keong, I mean, Moji was the support group for the support group, one-person support group, and that's the way we went. My own urban design ideas, a lot of them were nurtured there. I'll share one of my favorite initiatives. That was actually called Adam's House in Paradise, that was curated not by Moji, but by Keong and Glenn Weiss, who's also a graduate of this program, and in one of the studios we did that I'll mention later. That, I think, was in 1984. I had problems with dates because my laptop doesn't open the old Microsoft Word files anymore, so I have to do something about that. And I see I had some wrong dates on those studios as well. But anyway, it celebrated Adam Purple's, he made an amazing garden off from Eldridge Street in East Village. East Village was a different place then too. And it was about to be reclaimed by NYCHA for some housing thing they wanted to do, and it was soon destroyed, of course. I think during the exhibit it was actually destroyed. But Adam Purple, he pioneered the sensibilities, in many ways, of today's urban ecology discourse. He was a familiar figure in Manhattan. He used to haul horse manure from Central Park down to his garden on his bicycle, dressed, of course, in purple. And I still treasure the little catalog that came out of it, beautifully assembled on a typewriter, of course, with Moji and Cliff's names on it, among some others, as benefactors. Moji understood the importance of record, especially in the face of power. If it's not recorded, it didn't happen in many ways. And Storefront was really about remembering. And Adam Purple, of course, is still with me many years later. I also remember the Detroit is Everywhere exhibit. That was 1995. That was prepared by the Urban Design Studio in, I guess it was, yes, it was that spring. It was very much orchestrated by Moji, of course. And at Storefront Everywhere, you know, spilled out into the street. I remember the opening, all those pivoting panels were kind of open, and Detroit was everywhere. On Kenmare Street, for sure, Detroit was everywhere in the whole country, which was our point. But Everywhere moved to Detroit as well, where it was strategically plastered all over the downtown, you know. And this was also spearheaded by Moji. She had a special interest in Detroit because she, of course, studied in Michigan together with Keong, and I don't remember exactly all those connections. But that studio also engaged Camilo Vergara, who became a photographer. He helped launch his impressive career, of course. 91, with Moji's nurturing, we mounted the New American Ghetto show, which came out of a Columbia architecture studio that I taught, but was heavily involved with Camilo, but of course with Moji, even though she didn't teach the studio. And that broke new ground in visualizing the pathology of American cities, American urbanism, in this case of Mott Haven in the South Bronx. It was also Columbia's first digital studio, never recognized as such, but I'm talking about details here. Moji was also all about details, as you probably know. She remembered details. Memory 2, okay, the High Line, that's 2000. I want to remember the High Line. High Line is difficult to remember. But I used to be part of a studio space down on 14th Street, just off the High Line. There was still meat on the streets. Actually, there were live chickens downstairs. Horrible smell in the summer, but the rent was good, almost nothing. And we could take a 2x12 and bridge it across to get on the High Line from the roof. And enjoy the marvelous kind of secessionist nature that was taking over the whole place. I mean, it was really amazing. Anyway, by around 2000, these two characters, Joshua David and Robert Hammond, they got together, and Moji was really mixed up in this somehow. I could never figure out it. But they were local residents that had the idea to save the High Line because, of course, the real estate industry wanted to rip it down and get on with the business. They were wrong, of course. But anyway, Bob and Joshua founded Friends of the High Line, and Moji was so involved that somehow she convinced me to do a studio here with her, an architecture studio on the subject of reusing the High Line in order to provide ammunition for the cause. We did it, and something of that studio we managed to find that survives upstairs. I think Casey, you got involved slightly later with the thing. But she was really indefatigable in this thing. And frankly, I think somewhat like the storefront question, the ultimate success of the High Line somehow eluded Moji's acknowledgement, her mention. So I'm mentioning it now. As for the studio, I remember how difficult it became after 9/11, of course, to do the studio. We couldn't even get up there. Well, we did, but you had to sneak around. But we did produce the first High Line studies. But more than anything else, I remember how at the end of that long day, in the face of being displaced from our loft in Tribeca, we were right in front of the Twin Towers practically. Moji said, absolutely, come stay with us. And she, Cliff, and Haller lived in the Normandy on West 86th Street. We went up there. We camped out with them, myself, Maria Paula, and Sarah. And we remember to this day how Moji was actually the only one of the many people we knew in New York who offered. And we frequently mentioned that to ourselves. We stayed quite a while, too long, I think. But it was nice, and we made dinners and things. Holly, you probably remember this. And Holly was great because, you know, our daughter had to keep her head sort of on straight. She was 6 years old and had seen, a piece of her world vaporize in front of her eyes. And you helped her with her piano lessons, which she's since forgotten about. But anyway, that was a big help at that time. Okay, Memory 3, the Mayor's Conference, 2011. Probably a lot of you remember that one. But a little background. In 1991, Bernard asked me to take over the urban design program, which, of course, a lot of you are graduates of. And actually, I have these dates wrong. I must have asked her sooner, around 93. We had the first class that had a sort of critical mass. I think it was 11 or 12 students. I don't know if any of you were here. And we worked in Antwerp Then we went to London, then we went to Brussels, we went around. But anyway, at that point, when we had some students, I asked Mojdeh to join the faculty. There was great enthusiasm, as always. We started putting together, this sequence of the global studios, which was her first involvement during the spring semesters. There was Detroit, of course, which was, in many ways, the most interesting, I think, and most engaged. And then Naples and Caracas, they all had elaborate publications at the end, very much spearheaded by Mojdeh and designed, of course, in collaboration with Mariano de Moras. I don't know if Mariano's here, but he was great and a friend of Mojdeh. Anyway, I remember the enormous energy, the time commitment that she made to those publications. They took all summer and beyond. Of course, we had no money. But it was a labor that really engaged her, huge interest and generosity. Time passed. There were ups and downs, of course. I mean, as you would expect with Mojdeh, it made sense finally in 2007 for her to direct the fall semester studios when Brian left. I guess we'll see Brian today, right? I remember her hesitation at first. But she took a little time to think about it, not too long actually, and started getting all these ideas, and they started to multiply, and she took off with it. And those fall studios, I think, were her golden moment, at least in the urban design program. They were packed. I mean, New York City, Albany, Buffalo, New York State, North America, I don't know, Hawaii, and somehow she made sense of it all, at least to some of us. I'm not sure about myself, but I remember thinking, where will this all end? I mean, it's a small country. In a sense, it culminated, of course, in the Mayor's Conference in the fall of 2011. And I remember thinking that even Mojdeh couldn't pull that one off. I mean, even Mojdeh. And I never saw her work so hard on anything. It was uphill, but she prevailed. And it was brilliant. It was the ultimate achievement of beyond the studio. And it will not be repeated, I assure you, by any of us. So, in conclusion, well then yesterday when I was sitting down thinking about this stuff, trying to find the old files, I was thinking, well, the only thing Mojdeh couldn't pull off was, in spite of always trying, was trying to get one of her event posters behind the glass in the Avery elevator. And, I just checked and, nothing's changed there. But things should have been easier for Mojdeh. We all knew it. I remember how she and I shared rants. I mean, we would, exchange rants one after the other. Usually about twice a month. It would build up and then we would, go at it. It was therapy. But she never looked back, and that was the amazing part. Always positive energy and positive results. So to return to Flusser, I mean, she survives in my memory and many others. Many of you are here today. I think, like today, it doesn't get better. I mean, this is Mojdeh's kind of thing. She organized this day herself, actually, through the memory of others. She taught you very well, and she taught you how to carry on. So thank you to all of you, and let's carry on with Justin.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you especially to Dongsei for helping put together today's event. So our first panel, interdisciplinary collaborations. For those of you who know Mojdeh, you know that she encouraged interdisciplinary conversations that brought together professionals and other disciplines into the studios. This forced urban design students and faculty to reconsider some of the most basic assumptions that we make in our research and design processes. Understanding the city needs multiple perspectives and introduces new considerations that might have otherwise been impossible to imagine. Our speakers today bring diverse angles to the table, sharing their expertise to enrich our discussions and our work in making cities better. So first we'll have Anne Gatling-Haynes. She's a Sloan Fellow from the MIT School of Management, where she was focused on urban economic development strategy. Previously, she was the CEO of the New Haven Economic Development Corporation and a representative for the Deputy Mayor of Economic Development here in New York City after 13 years practicing as an architect for Caesar Pelli Associates. And also taught with us in the urban design program in the fall studios at Columbia as one of our interdisciplinary, what Mojdeh called the embedded critics. Next, we'll have Billie Tsien, who's one of the founding partners at Todd Williams Billie Tsien Associates here in New York. And she has taught architecture at many institutions, including Parsons, SciArc, Harvard, and Yale University. And Mojdeh worked for Todd and Billie 1981 to 1984. And finally, we'll have Dan Wiley, who is the community coordinator for Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, where he directs the Southwest Brooklyn's office initiatives, where he coordinates planning projects and initiatives in the waterfront communities stretching from downtown Brooklyn to Red Hook, Gowanus, and Sunset Park for well over a decade. He's also on the board of directors for the Center for Urban Pedagogy, or CUP, and he taught with us in the urban design studios with Mojdeh for several years, again, as our embedded critics, bringing in the community perspectives. So we'll get started with Anne.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. It's actually an honor to be here. I knew Mojdeh, as Justin said, from the Fall Urban Design Studios. And I really wanted to talk today a little bit about her inspirational and innovative leadership style, because I think that's something that I've taken away, and actually my career thus far has been inspired by that. Hers was not a traditional take charge, lead the troops kind of leadership, although she had that too, but kind of a ninja leadership. She designed a studio of pedagogy that helped instill the same traits in her students and collaborators. This is really critical. And my experience with her just started with the most invigorating but intimidating studio review I've ever participated in. I think it was the fall of 2009, and it was so dynamic that I didn't even know who was in charge until the end of the day. After nearly spending 13 years in practice, I had loads of experience in studio reviews, but this was completely different. I enjoyed the one-to-one access to the student projects during the science fair morning, but I wondered how these students were faring with so many different repeated opinions that were obviously very different from each other. But then at lunch I realized how many critics there were. It felt like maybe 99 reviewers for 100 students. And many of them here today were very important people. I think I managed to sort of cough up 2 or 3 thoughtful remarks, but very quietly, and I'm not sure anyone actually ever heard them. But I went home feeling energized and incredibly aware of that I just witnessed something very different. In reflection, this is the first exposure to a new way of leading, and I call it the Mojdeh method. Embrace the messy. Draw energy from the crowd, channel voices into the design process, allow people to own things, and then make a lasting impact. And that's something that is quite repeated throughout my recent career. Given my inner Mussolini, I was always predisposed to more top-down, sort of structure it, move it forward kind of way of working. But the more I got involved in urban development and the more that I see that the world is changing, her leadership style has actually proved to be more timely and more effective. The urban development process, as many of you know, is very messy. And rather than just artificially lay over an organizational framework, Mojdeh knew that in studio and in life, you need to work with the chaos, influence it in live time, and then leverage the energy that all of the different voices are bringing to the table. Everybody would love to have picture-perfect design solutions for any project that they're working on. Organizing built-in natural form, design process without confrontation, and implementation that's seamless. Of course, that's not reality. This is reality. The world is getting messier, far more connected, and even more dynamic with substantial economic and climatic shifts. But urban development can still take a long time, even in locations where governments are flush with cash. This is Cambodia. As urban designers, we want to be the leaders of the process, but we need others to carry out the work. So we need to find and adopt a leadership strategy that, in fact, brings this vision to reality and implements it. This is also Cambodia. And the mosaic of influences, as you all know, that influence this process, sacred to profane, contemporary to ancient, past histories, and new cash. And everyone involved has a different sense of what might be important, speak different languages, and hear different things. And what Mojdeh knew more than anyone else, and I think instilled in all of us, is that if you try and control the process, you'll find yourself frustrated. Most importantly, great ideas that you have will be dropped, and since no one feels ownership for them. And actually now just hearing this Highline story, it's actually very familiar. I experienced the need for the Mojdeh method early on at City Hall. For me, this was a sabbatical from practice to better understand the client side. And 2008 was when I joined. It was at the height of the messy financial crisis, and development was really grinding to a halt. The City Hall was actually quite a bit like an architecture firm, open workstations, lots of collaboration, project teams. But the project context and stakeholders were incredibly different from anything I had experienced. This was a context where bringing an agenda to a meeting was actually an innovation. This is the World Trade Center, and it was a really messy project when I joined to lead a feasibility effort for the Performing Arts Center, which was going to be the last building on the site. The city was the proxy client for a non-existent board, and the task was to really facilitate a design to figure out how to design foundations at track level, 5 levels below. Between the city and the resident companies that wanted the project to live, the governor's office, Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, and the Port Authority, which would rather have it killed or moved, and the private developers who seemed endlessly frustrated with the dynamic at the site. It was a miracle that there was any progress at all. And arriving with an agenda obviously was not enough. So the effort required sort of multi-layer management, sort of letting the white noise of the politics play out, managing the sort of day-to-day number of people that are involved in the process, talking, while managing the minutia of engineering design at track level with railroad employees. It's still not built, but at least the effort led to the initiation of a board of directors and a client for the project so that the orphan could possibly live. And it had become very clear to me after my third recession that the physical development that I loved was ultimately driven by the state of the economy. So I decided to get under the hood. So I returned to New Haven, this is New Haven, to lead a nascent economic development agency. And in case you don't know, New Haven was the perfect city in 1638. The 9-square grid with the green at the center was a planner's dream. And then it was very messy during the urban renewal of the 60s, and both development eras really reflect the top-down leadership. They can be quite static. During this period, I rejoined Mojdeh for the fall semester because New Haven was one of the sites, and I was an embedded critic and also a tour guide, so it was great. Typically, urban studios are broad, but this was like a supersized studio. It was an urban binge. There was 4 site analyses, 2 site solutions, and many deliverables in various media. On top of it, there were 10 teachers or embedded critics, many of whom are here today. This was a crowd-based team teaching method that I had never seen before. And not only were students asked to be part of this chaos and sort of listen to multiple voices, they were required to find their own voice. And in fact, students were able to experiment, most importantly, with leadership, stumble a little bit, rapidly develop some new techniques, and iterate on technique as much as design, which is really critical. And plus, everything looked fantastic because Mojdeh just kept pushing for more and more and more. Here's New Haven. It's actually hard to see, but this is the industrial district of New Haven. Back in New Haven, I was trying to help maintain and grow our industrial sector, which was really critical. The jobs that we needed were manufacturing, and right at the front door of the city is effectively the manufacturing district. How do you rebuild an industry, or how do you catalyze rapid occupation of a district? well, you do market research, you do planning, facilitate regulatory approvals, things that you typically learn in planning and design schools. But as I found out, you need to build institutions and enlighten people that are going to basically generate the pipeline of talent and companies for the future to come. We identified the need for a manufacturing incubator during this process, and in speaking to our entrepreneurs and companies, they really needed a space that they didn't have to purchase expensive equipment, but they could share it, that they could then innovate and develop new products and technologies. So as much as I wanted to start an incubator, I brought a diverse group of entrepreneurs together, all of whom had expressed interest in the project. And the first meeting in my office was kind of quiet. No one really read the agenda, and it was a little bit quiet. So once I started going off-site, going to workshops, bringing in additional people that were actually industries that were existing and working on different things, the conversation got more lively. And people started identifying roles for themselves. They brought themselves to the table, and they started shaping the agenda. Within 3 weeks, the founders started a Google group that grew from 13 to about 80 people. They started weekly meetups and hands-on workshops. They found a way to start a nonprofit, essentially self-fund to buy tools for the space. And they also looked at similar institutions and networked with them. The organization has now spawned new companies, inventions, relationships, and it has grown and attracted new companies to an otherwise lackluster part of the city. The Moji method worked. In 2012, I left New Haven to participate in the MIT Sloan Fellows Program, which is an MBA program mid-career. The last email exchange I had with Moji was at the beginning of this phase, and her incredible enthusiasm, support, and belief that, in fact, you can change the world through multiple disciplines, especially in urban design, was a huge boost. At MIT, I set off to explore how the underlying dynamics of the innovation economy were affecting our growth and, in fact, restraining it in some cases in New Haven. The research project became something I call connective development, and very much about Moji Studio and her ability to connect so many people and collect, I like that word, really makes a big difference in the innovation economy. It looked at retooling traditional mono-locational economic development strategy and sort of pairing it with the fact that our world is actually increasingly multi-locational. This is actually a bibliometric mapping of all the scientific collaborations in the United States, and you can see quite clearly where the connections and activity are happening within the entire United States. It will take new leadership at the municipal level to finally recognize the interconnectedness of this map and work together. They should stop fearing the competition, embrace the messiness, and initiate a network-based team governing model, because this is the way that we can support the innovation economy. In other words, it's gotten messy out there, and the way we practice economic development in cities actually hinders growth at the moment. It's time to channel the energy, embrace a new method, and use the Moji method.
So Moji was a friend. And I just wanted to talk about three things that I think about when I think about her. First one is stand the world on its head. Second one is look sideways. So some of the earliest work that I saw that she and Cliff did was really a kind of amazing work. So this was Monumental Propaganda, a show that she and Cliff designed, where artists from all over the world were asked to sort of reimagine what might be done with the monuments once the USSR fell. And so their design was to make these display cases that had Stalin's head as one of the bases. So they had their own idea of what to do with the sort of leftover monuments. And kind of looking sideways, I loved this installation that they did for the Wolf Gordon showroom, which is a company that produces wall surfaces, kind of wallpaper, and usually one sees it in these sort of big books, and they look truly horrible. but they came up with this idea of framing the different surfaces and making the frames the right size so you could really understand the full pattern of the surface. And in doing so, they made this most amazing installation of what is generally pretty boring material. So it was a way of not looking straight ahead at their task and what they were supposed to be doing, but looking sideways and thinking about another way of doing it. And then I loved this installation that they did for the Formica company. And here they took plaques of all of the various Formica materials and knitted them together. But what I thought was really ingenious was that they used a penny to be the final piece that knitted everything together. So the pieces came in loose, and then they would stick in a penny, and that would lodge everything together. So this issue of kind of looking beyond what you see immediately. Everybody knows these fluorescent rocks that are so boring in regular daylight, and when they're under a black light, they become amazing. And I think that that's something that she always was able to do. She was able to look at something that people passed by. This is a photograph by Aaron Siskind, whose work was primarily based on found images that he would photograph. So she could look at things and pull them out, in many ways, call our attention to things that we would overlook. So when I think about her, when we do our own work, I think about that sort of sideways look. So this is a tile that we developed for a project in Philadelphia. And on the street were these amazing ginkgo trees. And all of you know that ginkgo trees sort of carry their own light when in the fall, because they become this brilliant yellow. So we worked with Heath Tile to develop these bright yellow tiles, and then sort of made a mark at the bottom of each one, so that when we put them on a wall, it would feel as if it was a sort of ginkgo effect. So the final thing, characteristic that I think about Moji is that she never gives up, and she never gave up. I was reading the other night a poem by Galway Cannell called A Night in the Ruins, and the last stanza really very much connected to Moji. How many nights must it take one such as me to learn that we aren't, after all, made from that bird that flies out of its ashes? That for us, as we go up in flames, our one work is to open ourselves to be the flames.
Thank you very much. So we have Daniel Wiley.
All right. Well, I have a fine arts background, I'll admit it, and so I really wanted to do kind of a more pictorial kind of show of interaction with Moji. And thinking about this, really, she's an activist, and in the best sense of the word. The bringing together of multiple perspectives, cultures, aided with great graphics. Angela's wonderful map showing the distribution and nationalities of our students that can number in the fall in the urban design studio, as you know, 50 in the 50s, and overlay that with bringing in many different perspectives from the community, and forcing groups, now I shouldn't say forcing, encouraging, or, but I mean, Richard would probably tell you it is forcing, groups to get out of their comfort zone and get together with folks you wouldn't necessarily gravitate toward to collaborate with. I first found out about Mojdeh before I met her. Her book preceded her, Angst Cartography, the Gowanus Canal, in the 80s, which is a book I actually loved and stole from a friend of a roommate. And I don't know if she's here. I'll give it back if you want it. But this is from the 80s, investigating the Gowanus Canal and looking at it in a different way. It's also good subway reading, particularly on the platform going over the Gowanus Canal. My real interaction with Mojdeh was her need to get places that you couldn't get very easily. And in this case, you have the Brooklyn Navy Yard. I met her when she was doing a project focused on Brooklyn and waterfronts in the mid-2000s and putting up an exhibit at Brooklyn Borough Hall, and also combining students from multiple universities, including some places as far-fetched as Syracuse, where I was born, by the way, and bringing them to places that are very impermeable and opaque to most people. In this case, the Brooklyn Navy Yard, a place where we got in, and I guess you could think of it as a Trojan horse, and able to investigate the diversity of spaces in the yard, which is kind of a metaphor for the diversity of spaces in urban places throughout the world and here. And engage with the structures and all the apparatus that's in charge of space. Find out how people work, what kind of work, what kind of employment. Economy is very important. In fact, many of the studios, the titles include concepts like economy, but also abstract things like line and flow. So engaging in what happens with forgotten industrial space, or maybe not so forgotten industrial space, and how to rethink it. And of course, behind all that is some ideas of changing things up. And of course, the waste studio, we had 2 years of studios focused on waste and how we deal with waste, but also not necessarily literally, but how we define waste in the first place, and how that can extend on many different levels in terms of space, economy, people. So my job and background, although I have an arts background and planning background, is also politics, working for an elected official. So I have a district and a certain territory that I've been working on with communities and initiatives for the last 13 years. And so one of the first waste studios that we did focused on this district. Here, not showing the lines, but showing some of the places that we focused. And again, back to how you weave together. I like the discussion of weaving. In fact, some of the studios, some of the projects actually had weaving as a praxis. And in this case, weaving the groups together to work in different combinations in different parts of the studio, always pushing the boundaries of what people expect. And of course, there's a lot often pushed back, but there's an iteration of then trying to accommodate, make it work. Well, if it doesn't work, we'll try it a different way the next time. How about that? And then let us know how it didn't work or it did work. And then some people are often surprised. And I actually spent a lot of time going through all the contacts, because part of what I do is go to meetings and meet with groups and then try to figure out how to pull all these people together from multiple different backgrounds, from different goals and perspectives, be they business owners or advocates fighting waste transfer stations, or arts groups, or youth development, or housing people, multiple different kinds of perspectives. And I think the Urban Design Studio is a great place to actually take these spheres and throw them together and see what happens. There's controversy, there's disagreement, and even among our faculty, we have different perspectives. I will admit I have a certain perspective. I know some of our economic development interdisciplinary folks have a perspective. In fact, and when you showed the picture of the bull pit in City Hall, so it was like an architecture studio, and I said, oh, I thought that was a trading room floor. But always, and I think that today what we have here reminds me of our final reviews, these great things where then people come together after working with multiple stakeholders and constituencies, trading ideas, and actually growing further and spinning off into projects that can actually take root in the real world. Also, it's multi-scalar, obviously, and also multi-generational. This is also an example from one of the urban studies groups, where we had Red Hook Initiative host presentations where the students presented to elementary school kids, actually middle school kids, and then the middle school kids presented those to elementary school kids. And then they all got together, and the elementary school kids told the students here what their project was about. Of course, it also forced me to stretch, as Richard was saying. Luckily, I did participate in the Buffalo as a critic, but luckily I wasn't hired at that time, so I didn't have to go to Buffalo. But they did force us to go to New Haven, Connecticut. Did have to go to a place called Long Island, which I understand is connected to Brooklyn, so I learned that Long Island is part of, Brooklyn is part of Long Island. Also having people from agencies, authorities, as well as the grassroots come together. And always with a sense of humor, always with a real compassion, while still pushing the envelope. She loved the water, and that was also another thing we loved to do, which was to get out on the water. And she was never shy to participate and engage with colleagues in multiple different spheres. This is at Proteus Iguanas with Ron Schiffman, a good friend. I was glad to have them meet. This is a thing, I didn't figure out how to get this to work on the PowerPoint, but it actually is a 3D image in New Haven. And I call it the 3 emojis, because there's actually 3 emojis in there. So anyway, I think we all carry Moji and the Moji method with us. And I'm so proud to have worked with her and continue to work with all of you.
So I can invite our 3 panelists actually up to the front here for a short discussion. And I'll remind you that we are live streaming, so to speak into the mics.
So the subject of the section was interdisciplinary collaborations. It's sort of amazing in looking at your presentations to think of Moji as an interdisciplinary collaboration herself. I mean, I think the level of energy that she brought to her interaction with each individual person was kind of astounding, and to think that she was able to do that with every individual she came in contact with is sort of amazing. Billie, you probably worked with her first in terms of the people up here, obviously. Can you talk about the way in which her natural facility for kind of bringing things together and different issues together manifested early in her career?
I think that she, that was when we were really still all beginning our practice together. And so we're all kind of the guppies swimming in the same pool. I think in that case, it's a school of fish, and it's hard to tell exactly who is, forcing the school to go in what direction. I think it was really in her work with Cliff that you could really start to understand that she didn't look at things the way other people looked at them, and I really appreciated that. She was always, when you talk about interdisciplinary, I think she was interdisciplinary because she had no boundaries.
Mm-hmm. I was struck, actually, Anne, in your comments about embrace the messy. Mm-hmm. And then to see in Billie, your presentation following up, just how kind of clean and well-resolved all of their design work was. Mm-hmm. Sort of taking the messiness of those sort of crazy issues and managing in their own sort of design ethos to make it seem so simple and effortless and clean when you know that there was kind of all of that thought churning behind it. Dan, you work in an incredibly complex public environment, a kind of environment that Moji really embraced and I think thrived in. She sort of loved to parachute in and connect students to real life situations, and the messier the better. I think in government there's a kind of a natural tendency to try and make order out of the chaos. Maybe we put too much time into doing that. Can you talk about how that introduction of a kind of academic element and someone who is a catalyst and an instigator can actually bring about change?
Well, I think it's our best hope to come up with something. In fact, it provides for an opportunity to have a synthesis of something new to happen. I do notice there's a tendency for us to have very well-defined roles and points of view and some stasis in terms of, I'm the this, I'm the that, and we're doing this, we're doing that. And the real opportunity is where can you meet multiple goals? Well, how can you actually make something work that actually serves multiple purposes at the same time? And I think in this age of fiscal austerity or battles over spending, that's actually a very efficient, smart way to work, which is how can you create something that is going to serve multiple purposes, because you don't have enough money coming from one agency for one purpose. And obviously the whole idea that the federal government is actually starting to awaken to, which is breaking down silos and actually having agencies work across and compare notes. That's a direction I think that is happening. Wow, we have to push it.
I was going to say, looking across the sort of the three presentations, something that Moji always worked very hard at was kind of pushing an idea, right? And this idea of kind of being able to communicate with people that aren't in your silo or aren't kind of from your own point of view or backgrounds is very important. And I like kind of everything from the elementary school student explaining the college student their own project, or the sort of finding a detail or finding a material, how it works. You know, it's interesting in this conversation to see how do we use ideas in urban design in different disciplines to really find ways to communicate with each other. And I think all of you have brought an incredible sort of show that Mojdeh was very good at teaching people how to do that. So definitely thank you for continuing.
Yeah, I think actually to that point, the example that you gave of the students presenting to the middle school students, presenting to the elementary school students, presenting back to the designers, was sort of a classic kind of Mojdeh problem, in which you make it as complex as you possibly can and as charged. And somehow it's this incredibly simple lesson about communication that you can kind of take away and incorporate into your, the work that you do, and understanding how message gets translated, and that what you put out there in the world isn't always how it comes back. And I think that that's amazing. And do you, both in terms of your the work you're doing now at MIT, and also your time in New Haven and sort of embedded in this studio, do you find that different audiences respond to this sort of hyper, sort of frenetic way of sharing information differently, or do you feel that people are kind of programmed for it given all of the other things going on in our lives?
Oh, and I think every audience is completely different in terms of the way that they're going to be receptive to that type of context. So, for example, and I think this goes back to government, government likes structure and likes to know that there are people in roles, and so they're not going to be as comfortable in this sort of chaotic mess. And so I think the role of designer is to create some order for that audience to be more comfortable in the conversation about what the issues are, but at the same time you have to be sort of multitasking to bring other audiences that aren't part of that conversation to the table in their own language as well. And I think actually I think there's a moment in Mojdeh Studios that you sort of reach almost a breaking point of overwhelming the number of voices, the number of things you're trying to grapple with at the same time. And it's almost at that point, it's like it's probably an economics graph of some kind, but it's like it's at that point when all of a sudden maybe the clarity of what you truly believe can come through, and then you can understand through those voices how to communicate back what you're feeling. So I think she sort of does this in a very existential way, as well as a very much of a simple explanation on teach or talk to people in the language that they, or way that they want to be hearing the information as well. So yeah, no, every audience is completely unique. But I think more people more recently are getting more used to the messy, even though they don't want to be there yet. So I think that at a certain point, the people that are actually able to manipulate those environments and actually sort of move something forward are more skill set based for the future as opposed to the past.
I think actually you bring up a really good point there, which is one of scale. One of the kind of amazing lessons that Mojdeh taught me is that if you can't solve a problem, you're working at the wrong scale. So you either create a bigger problem, which is usually the case, or you hone in and try and create a smaller problem. And it strikes me that, Billie, you work, at predominantly at the scale of the building and the kind of one-on-one user interface with the building. And Dan, you work at the scale of the city and the borough. Can you talk about the way in which the issues Anne's bringing up impact or translate into your work?
Are you looking at me?
Sure, either.
I have to say I feel kind of the outlier here, because it's true that everything we do is, instead of going like this, it's about taking this and going like this, and then going like this and going like this. So in many ways, I do think that design is the way that the world becomes more simple for people. And I think that takes a huge amount of effort to make things. We always know making things simple takes a huge amount.
Yeah, that's the hardest.
So I like very much what you said, Casey, about either you make the problem bigger or the problem smaller. So since we've been making the problem smaller all the time, I think I'm going to start working on making the problem bigger.
It's very effective, by the way.
Yeah. You have to go both ways, I think, a little bit.
So in the studio, if you talk to any of our past students, they'll complain to you about the macro and the micro. And this switching back and forth between the micro, the macro, the very micro, the very macro. And oh my God, how do we go back and forth? And we try different combinations of, do you go back and forth? How do you iterate that multiple times in the semester? Or do you do it the first half and the second? And I'll be interested to go to your review and see how you guys are dealing with it these days. But I would like to say that the revolution has come a little bit because we were hit by Sandy at the midpoint, toward the midpoint of our last studio. I'd like to point out that we have at least 3 of our students now working on teams as part of Rebuild by Design, which is the HUD Sandy rebuilding planning strategy, which is kind of a crazy Dutch guy was able to become the advisor to Sean Donovan. And get this, he calls it, yes, he calls it the Trojan horse. But I'd like to point out that those 10 design teams, which are now trying to figure out what they're doing, are feeling around in the region for how to do things that are local and very specific, but replicable across the region. And they're interdisciplinary teams. They're multi-discipline, multi-background, many different countries coming together in these teams. So I'd like to point out that here we have a lot of federal money that's actually put into a practice that looks a lot like the Mojdeh method to me. Well, we'll see what comes of it. But
No,
oh, time check. Okay, great.
so thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So shifting gears from interdisciplinary collaborations to pedagogical approaches. Mojdeh obviously taught for over 20 years, but it's not only kind of what happens in the studio from the faculty side, but what happens as a pedagogy, as a body of work. So as the cliche goes, you learn more from your classmates than you do from your professors. And this doesn't even begin to cover the extent and depth of learning that happens when you work in kind of teams and reimagined teams and reallocated teams. This approach is the primary mode of operation in the urban design program that Mojdeh fully took on board and really found a way to innovate as a teaching and pedagogical model. There are few opportunities to carry this learning process seamlessly into teaching, practice, and into learning as demonstrated by the participants in this panel. The Urban Design Symposia in recent years have been organized to be introduced by students and alumni of the program, and this panel is a version of that. Many of these people are now educators, researchers, initiators who continuously draw on their experience that have been acquired here and in teaching each other with this model that Mojdeh really helped to establish. So first we have Verbakel. He's an adjunct professor at KU Leuven in Belgium, where he's taught architecture and urban planning, also at the European Master of Urbanism program, and here at Columbia University GSAPP. He's also the founding principal at Plus Office Architects in Brussels, and the president of the editorial board of A+, which is Belgium's national architecture magazine. Bart is a former student of Mojdeh's and helped to teach her in the urban design programs over the years. Next, we'll have Michelle Young, who's the founder of Untapped Cities, which is an online publication about urban discovery and exploration. You know, anyone that's into blogs and internet probably know who she is already. She's also a writer for Huffington Post and an architectural columnist for Kill Screen magazine, and she was one of Mojdeh's students, urban studies students in the New York-Paris program. Wassim, Shaaban, and Marina Marquez, who are recent graduates from 2012 from the Urban Design program. Wassim is the co-founding partner of TW2M Design Build. Marina is an architectural designer at SEMU, New York, and the co-founder of the design collective KYD, Controlled Architectural Accidents. And finally, we'll have Sagi, Golan, and Scott Archer, who are recent graduates from our class last year in 2013 of urban design. Sagi is currently working at the New York City Department of City Planning as an urban designer, which Mojdeh has effectively colonized. And Scott Archer is an architectural and urban designer at Buyer Bender Bell's Washington, D.C. office.
Thank you for inviting me. I was very happy to be part of it. I had hoped to be in the panel number 4, the one about food, because most of my memories with Mojdeh's, they do center around food. I'm thinking about the fantastic dinners we had in Australia, the red vegetables she tries to feed Justin, the plates we broke in a Parisian restaurant in spring 2012, one of my last times with Mojdeh alone. But here I am talking about a pedagogy. I went back to a lot of the things we did and the things I've been teaching in my own career. And I decided to name this talk a pedagogy of inches and kilometers. Not only because of the scalar thing, but about this idea that Mojdeh has, that she profoundly looks for the connection between these very small details and the very large scale, which was already discussed in the previous group. There is a quote by Sir Ken Robinson, who's a very famous theoretician about pedagogy, which really frames, I think, one of the visions that Mojdeh has also taught me, which is this thing about unlearning. We need to really unlearn quite a few things, which I think is also a bit of a part of the school or the UD program philosophy, in order to become more creative again. My first encounter with this school, before I actually decided to come to this program, I had the honor to be part of a review of the Urban Studies program, and we spent the better half of an afternoon talking about a conceptual model, which I've never heard about in that time in my life, which was made out of rubber bands and hairpins. I was impressed how much you can actually say about hairpins and rubber bands. I decided I wanted to be part of that pedagogy and enrolled into, subscribed and was lucky to enroll into the program. I also showed this project that we just saw, which was produced by Mojdeh and her partner in many different ways. This was the penny screen, if I remember correctly, which is this idea of, to me it sums up quite a lot of things of how she thinks about bringing urban concepts together. It's spatial, it's economical, it has economical value, literally. It's held together by understanding the smallest component, the penny itself. It has beautiful drawings. If you ever have a chance to see the actual construction drawings of it, it's quite that could be framed as well. And it's innovative. It's a materiality. It has a philosophy. It has a poetry to it. And a second project that I would like to show, which is also one of these connections between having a model, having a materiality, having a vision, having an idea about, in this case, the built volume of Manhattan centralized in Central Park. Just the object by itself is already interesting, I think. But it taught me that there is a big connection between actual design practice and actual execution and the scale of what cities are made of, or regions are made of, or the world is made of in the case of Mojdeh. we had this really nice, one of the first times I taught with her, we had a very nice talk about divergent thinking, which is part of this TED talk that Ken Robinson gave, and that was animated by RSA, one of my favorite online videos, I have to say. And this idea of divergent thinking, which is really important in understanding how students learn and how students are asked to frame different questions, to understand that the question can be interpreted in a different way, that there's many answers of it, that it doesn't need to be linear, it doesn't need to be convergent, it can be lateral. To me, this was quite important. In this talk, there's quite a few elements that are mentioned, and I think to me this is, applies also to what we've been doing with Mojdeh. Education is no longer a guarantee for a job, which is true. We've seen how many interesting people coming out of this program were actually struggling to find jobs when the economy was going down. There is a big question about how you can educate a workforce while the economy changes so rapidly, because we can't plan what will happen at the end of this year, let's say about the end of the next week. And strangely enough, most of our educational models are based on this very old 19th century industrialization model. Think about school bells, factory bells, standardized testing, the idea of that kids are being put to a system based on the date of birth, date of production. All these kind of things have is what most of us come from. I come from an engineering architectural school. So this idea about creativity and divergent thinking for me was very, very essential in my education. And literally, Ken Robinson also says that the stuff of growth is collaboration is the stuff of growth. That the great learning actually happens in groups. This is true for all of the work we've done together. This fantastic diagram produced by Lee shows one of the studios we taught together and how all of these, this was the Buffalo Brooklyn studio, and out of all of these exercises that we did, pulls together into a flow diagram. It's highly complex, but I can explain everything, which I'll spare you because that's not the point. But it shows you, it's a Röntgen photo of what we actually have been doing in designing a process, designing a program, designing an exchange between people, and also understanding that the outcome might not be something that we know in advance. There's the other drawing that you've seen also in two instances this afternoon, which was drawn by Angela, explaining exactly the mode of operation behind these educational models. I'll end with mentioning a project that's very dear to me because it was after my teaching engagement for this school that I worked with students from Belgium coming back for 2 years in a row. We had this was a project that was instigated by Mojdeh. She encouraged me to do this. And we just published a book about this. This book is dedicated to Mojdeh, and it's not only, it was actually only possible through the connections, the inspiration, and the setup of the work we did. The book was run in parallel with all the studios that Mojdeh did herself, somewhere in Brooklyn, on the Navy Yard, on Red Hook, on East New York, and so on and so on. And in this method of teaching, we've learned a lot from what we did here. There is a lot of engagement with actual things that are happening within the city, within professional life. This is the Guggenheim Lab in, which is actually there when we were site visiting for 1 month. Of course, we have our own atelier. This is not sponsored by an American corporation. The exchange between our students, which are undergrad level, and the Ivy League students at the postgraduate level already is an interesting setup. Another thing we ask the students to do is this the idea of an experiment. Most of our visits when we come to foreign cities, and this is something we also did in the EUD program here at GSAPP, is that there's a bit of a top-down or a distance between what you're looking at and how you record it or how you understand it. I ask my students to really do an experiment which is not about the product of what you get out of it, but the actual understanding of going through a process or an experience. This girl, she wanted to be a one-day gentrifier in Red Hook. She rented a lot for one day, sat there all day, and actually started to have a conversation with quite a few people in a very interesting way, almost like an art performance. Another of my students enrolled in this kind of interesting Navy art occupation of the artist invasion. Yes, there is a big future for creative economy, but we still criticize if it needs to take place in these large industrial volumes. That also could be part of production within the city. Some of it is also a bit strange, I think. Students having an urban picnic in the middle of Crown Heights corner, I think, or downtown Brooklyn, if I remember correctly. But actually getting quite an interesting conversation with people on the street. Another thing that we speak about a lot is the physical component of the digital or the social networks that we all understand. It's seemingly completely useless exchange of data, but somehow it's a finder's thing, and people really are posting, this is part of an art project that was done, or posting data to be found, like the dead drop. The use of the metaphor, obviously the metaphor has a very strong and long history in urban design teaching and other types of envisioning what a city can be, which is part of this other thing. The idea of black and white thinking. When we are learning about history of New York, you have this very known people that look like the angry white man and this friendly lady with a similar haircut as Moji. Somehow it changes. You get a different type of person looking all friendly and quite nice that actually represents the power. And then you have these Ivy League students that are out of job but doing fantastic work with community service and artists in resident program. Mental mapping, drawings that we made right when we came back to Belgium to understand the tissue of East New York that we had looked at. Historical understanding, overlays of city grids and how they were envisioned and pulled together, almost like a fantastic drawing. Linking economical data to physical concepts of typology and buildings, understanding the policy or the mental constructs behind planning and zoning, how this happens over time, and which kind of issues are mentioned at what point and because of what reason. And then I'm trying to end. All of this comes together in a kind of drawings that for us were very specific and detailed and really talk about architectural projects, but that at the same time link the site, the issues that play a role within the larger city, the region, and actually the world at large. There's also, all of this work was combined in this book, and I think I'll end with this quote that we received from Moji when we nominated her for a teaching award, which I think is true, that there is a big award that we were able to show her that we were very happy with the work that she did with us in teaching us, in learning as a pedagogy, and changing us as people. Thank you.
A little shorter than Howard. Okay, so one of my last semesters in urban planning program here, Moji told me to stop making PowerPoints. So that is what I decided to do. So I will show just one image in a little bit. But so there are some people who not only change the trajectories of your career, but also alter how you see the world around you. The way in which I see cities today, how I train writers in my publication Untapped Cities to look differently at their everyday environment for secret gems, layers of history, the quirks that others miss, come from Moji's development of my eye. For those that don't know, Untapped Cities is an online publication that's about urban discovery. At its theoretical root, which was formed here at Columbia, it's about bridging the gap between the academic discussion of urbanism and the popular consumption of it. So really, we're just trying to make urbanism hip and accessible for everybody. The way we push writers, budding writers and photographers to get out of their comfort zone, encourage them to try new things, tailor internships to each individual's strengths and weaknesses, owes a debt to Moji's pedagogy.
We also actively try to make the city our office instead of the other way around. We spend about 2 to 3 days of the work week in a different neighborhood, exploring it and working from there. Perhaps most importantly, taking a cue from Mojdeh's multidisciplinary approach, Untapped Cities is a community of extremely varied contributors who range from experts in city agencies to residents who simply want to share. Lawyers, artists, architects, bankers, fine arts writers, anthropologists, you name it. What they have in common is that they share a passion for the urban environment. So I met Mojdeh in the New York-Paris program. Frankly, I thought choosing urban studies meant I wouldn't have to do any design work, but boy was I wrong. Most of the students in my studio were in the same boat, but from different backgrounds. There were traditional city planners, an economics major, a civil engineer. I was a fashion buyer who became a cellist in a rock band, so a real motley crew of non-designers who didn't really know what a conceptual model could be or to make one. But she pushed us to be designers, not so that we could create an exact replica of anything or build the type of models we saw the MArcs or the UD kids doing. It was about transferring ideas that we had formed cognitively or through observation, representing it through the use of our hands and different materials, and having that process of building inform or change how we saw our sites in the real world. So here is, okay, so this is my only slide. It comes directly from a presentation at the Paris program. So this weird-looking model was a turning point for me in her class. It addresses the level of accessibility in Sunset Park through materials of different transparencies, paralleling the eye's ability to access activity when you walk the streets. The amorphous shape conveyed the constantly shifting boundaries of the neighborhood and the elements within. But when I first conceived of it, I wanted everything to be very precise. There was a specific shape that I wanted, and each layer of material would be in that shape. As I struggled to get the materials to conform, since I don't have any experience, in a sudden move of frustration, I bent all of the metal wire at once into this messy ball. And suddenly I sat there realizing that I had been trying to make a very diverse and complex neighborhood into a linear thing which would not have been the right reflection of the neighborhood at all. I brought it in, and Mojdeh loved it. Not because it was nice looking, but because she knew I had reached a new abstraction in how to look at cities. I think all her students go through a similar path when you're in studio with her for the first time. She tears you apart, then motivates you and pushes you, pulling you out of your comfort zone. But I think destabilization was the process, but not the goal. We trusted that we were in a process of transformation because she was so well attuned to our strengths and weaknesses. Yet at the same time, once you survived, her approach adapted accordingly. Mid-semester, she called because she wanted to know what my future goals were. Based on that, she decided then and there we had to change the entire scope of my project. You're getting stuck with what you know about the fashion industry, she said, researching sweatshops in Sunset Park. But we need to go more global based on your interests. She's one of the few teachers that I have ever encountered that knew how to adapt her curriculum to every student. And then later, she would become like a second mother. She'd remember you when coming across research she was doing, or people she met, and connect you with them. You get emails at all times of the night saying, I have an idea for you, or a message full of emoticons supporting your next presentation. She'd invite you over for brunch or to check out a new exhibit together. Whenever I was with her, it felt like a process of discovery. My eyes opened to at least several new things. Then she was better than your own mother because, let's talk about the High Line, actually reminded me that she was the one who taught a few of us how to break into the third section of the High Line when it was closed off. After that, I pretty much couldn't stop breaking into things, so factories, underground tunnels. Yesterday I was in the James A. Farley post office across from Penn Station and got lost. Anyway, so she was an early supporter of Untapped Cities, pushing me to do more, to explore my academic studies through the lens of this publication. Whenever I fell back into complacency with my graduate work, she would call me to say she'd been thinking about me. Why make PowerPoint presentations when you can use Untapped Cities as a platform and voice for open source research and public discussion? I distinctly remember something she told me at a brunch in her Upper West Side apartment. She pulled the website up on her laptop and said, "You have a specific point of view here. Do you see that?" Looking back, this was the moment that Untapped became more than my own vision. It had the potential to bring people together over a common wonder and exploration of cities. It was my project, but it was for the public. We write about cities in a new way, rooted in urbanism and a deep knowledge of architecture, but we allow each reader to form his or her own lens. It's our job to inspire people, whether readers or contributors, one by one article at a time, to see their cities differently. These days, I often take a moment to think about what Moji would say about my current projects or something that I'm writing about. I hope that I can inspire half as many people as Moji did to keep pushing against all odds and to encourage others to discover their untapped potential. I was at an amazing event yesterday, which is called Artifacts, and it's sort of a modern-day salon, a multidisciplinary drinking event, I guess. But, the Low Line presented there in its early days. Yesterday, there was the New York Public Library Labs, plus the founders of Rap Genius, and the founders of the app Paper 53, which I'm assuming a lot of you probably use. But there was a great quote from them, from Paper 53, and they said that it's in the process of creating things that we figure out who we are. And I think it's safe to say that all of us here realized we could do a lot more than we thought just by knowing Moji. Thank you.
I'd just like to start by thanking Dongsei for inviting us here to speak. And we'd like to take this opportunity to kind of just dive in a little bit on what we think Moji's pedagogy was about. Marina and I had the opportunity to be in her studio, but we also had the opportunity to take her independent research class, and we'd like to use the research class work, which is a part of MI City conference, to further elaborate on what we think Moji's pedagogy was about.
So we understood her pedagogy as the creation of a continuous dialogue that will always start with a thorough research and data gathering and will be systematically presented to different audiences in order to make a stronger argument. As you can see in the diagram, we're seeing this pedagogy as cyclical operations that will repeat over and over and over again until you don't have enough time. So we started, or forever. So we started with two different researches that got more complex by combining them and then got even enriched by our visit to the island. And we're seeing each of these cycles as a three-step process in which the first step will be always comparing the studied system to that same system happening in another place of the world. Will help us to unfold and understand all its urban components. And then a second step in which we'll be comparing different subsystems within the same context, helping us to overlap them and understanding, going beyond the simple facts and understanding causes and effects that these subsystems have on each other. And then one third step that will always be testing it through a presentation in which we realize how right, or most of the times how wrong, we were in our statements.
Yeah. And actually, the third step in this case is very important to Moji because it was the way that we actually communicated these very, very complex ideas that we had. And down here, there's a very simple diagram that I had made, and in return, Beth Takayoka, from the Director of Communications in Kauai County, had sent me back a 3-page email of why this would never work. And that was a very, very interesting email to read, of course. It was very tough. But it actually showed us that Moji had always urged us to take these ideas and these programs that we would make and put them in very simple terms, very simple diagrams that someone that is outside of this realm of urban design can really easily understand. And this was the point where Marina and I actually merged our projects together, which just really became a lot of information. It was a part of this editing process that Moji always kind of helped us through.
And so another important aspect we want to highlight from Moji's methodology is the interdisciplinary collaboration we've been talking about, and we were always exposed through the studio, but we didn't necessarily understood it until we actually got to the island, and after meeting like a dozen people, we realized that stakeholders and community members and government officials were as important to our research as any other urban tool. And all of a sudden, that simple diagram we were showing in the previous slide got into this super complex constellation of projects and organizations and locations and different ideas that somehow were related in an invisible network that we thought we had to reveal.
And she actually also pushed us a lot of times to use this invisible network as a part of your program or a part of your urban solution in many cases. And it really did become very evident when we were in Kauai. So the next step from here was taking all this information, going through the cycle one more time to, again, produce an infographic that will show the amount of opportunity that we found by just being there for 9 days and having really intense conversations with all people. But it also shows us that even after reaching, a year and a half of this is still only a starting point where you can then go back and continue your process, these cycles over and over again, and the dialogue never really ends. And Moji, I don't think, ever saw it as an argument. She always just saw it as something to build up upon. And her and I had many arguments like that, but my favorite one was when I walked into Studio and she was already yelling at someone at my desk, and it turns out that my twin brother was sitting on my desk, and she had this 5-minute conversation with him, yelling about a paper that I might have turned in a little late. But I was thankfully spared, and we continued our argument outside. Thank you.
Thank you.
In order to further this discussion on pedagogy, we wanted to give a few examples of lessons that we took from Moji as her students and teaching assistants, in which we continue to integrate into our lives as designers, professionally and as recent instructors. Many of these lessons center around collaboration, as you have heard throughout the day. So collaboration and leadership, as was discussed in the first panel, Moji constantly pushed to have the most talented, knowledgeable people surrounding her studios and students, whether that be designers, past students, members of the community, or just those from other academic disciplines. However, today we look back at our fall UD semester. Her leadership is what facilitates all this intense collaboration. This image is a great depiction of her leadership style that we strive to both emulate in our work as professionals and teachers. It shows an inclusivity that is so important. Everyone is welcome at the table and encouraged for their input. But at the same time, this leadership has a strong authority, decisiveness, and ultimately complete respect. As a student last year, we were asked to identify innovation in Brooklyn, whatever that meant. Early on, my team tried to develop the notion that innovation is often the resultant of this collaboration, at which point we identified key concepts of urban spaces which foster collaboration, from controlled environments of the Navy Yard to live workspaces of Williamsburg, to get to the roots of these varying conditions and to try to understand why collaboration can occur and what informs it. We were encouraged to immerse ourselves in these communities. So with found furniture, some free coffee, and an empty spot on the sidewalk, we were able to set up a space for conversation through a medium of fake tarot card readings. However non-scientific and limited our study was, it allowed us to quickly get to know the details of the community, and we learned the importance of community immersion, and were encouraged to think differently and to take a risk.
And so in parallel to Scott's experience, my team at the Fall Studio also engaged in defining what is a learning city, whatever that means. And we believe that collaboration should occur through creation of connections in multiple scales and in physical and non-physical infrastructures. In interoperability, which all of us are engaging daily, my team and I looked at the mono-use and underutilized infrastructure that today physically disconnects communities on a smaller scale, but has the potential to connect on a larger scale 3 of the 5 boroughs of New York City. But at the same time, we continued and deepened our research to develop connections and redundancies between different systems in order to foster potential collaborations between research, educational, and industrial institutions, and by doing so, creating a more resilient infrastructure. So, But in the end, the fall midterm reviews and final reviews were done in a round-robin style and attracted over 60 diverse professionals on a Saturday morning. This allowed us to present multiple times, refine our presentations and our presentation methods, or even change strategy while we're presenting. And most importantly, get varied and in-depth feedback. And so here in the day of our fall studio final review, an image taken just in a moment of crisis for me and my team, just like I think it was 2 minutes before the start of the review. And it was a typical morning day for the studio that had a very rigorous routine. One team member did not really wake up. The other just arrived like a second before we started. And the print was not out of scale. So I was very nervous. But in that moment when we finally hung our presentation at 9:59 a.m., our teachers, Dongsei and Chris, suddenly became our team members while helping us hang the boards. It was clear to us that our presentation and its success was also theirs, and our teachers were basically our collaborators.
Another of our lessons was one in conversation. Critique that involved Moji was not simple task lists of what to do next, but in-depth conversations about core ideas and anticipated results that could last for hours, even requiring major redesigns the night before a review. Not only was this conversation influential to us at the moment, it carried into our subsequent projects. For example, Sagi and I, along with Samarthas and Vanessa Espiat, chose a spring project that required this thoughtful conversation with actual clients from the West African Health Foundation. Throughout the design process and later as summer researchers at the Urban Design Lab, we were able to have conversations that allowed for our designs to be more responsive to their needs, those of the local community, as well as the environment. And based on our suggestions, the foundation was able to expand their notion of what healthcare could mean in Kumasi.
An inspiration. In our first transition from Columbia University after graduating, Scott and I, together with Vanessa Espaillat, again, we were lucky to have the chance to teach at the School of Continuing Education here at Columbia University. The program was a summer program of engineering and urban design for high school students. All of a sudden, we became educators, and it was quite an exciting moment for us. We became educators of urban design. We had the opportunity to inspire these young students to be more engaged with the cities they live in, ask questions and explore their urban environment. Moji, as we all know, was a very strong believer that urban design should be taught from a very early age. Indeed, during the course of these 3 weeks, we became even more aware of the importance and potential of teaching urban design from that age. We came to inspire, but at the same time were inspired by the students' enthusiasm to learn and experiment. We hope that Moji was also inspired by us. And one last word from the last class that we were lucky to be taught by Moji. She was always centered on collaboration. Moji was able to provide respective leadership, community emphasis, complex connections through presentations, profound conversations, and lasting inspiration. She asked for the same in return from her students, and we should all strive for emulation as designers, teachers, and collaborators.
So we have our reunion here a little bit, right? It's sort of incredible to hear kind of across different years and different programs, even the approaches that Moji brought. And I think it's really interesting to kind of hear the sort of the transition from being a student to becoming a teacher again. And I think the idea of the kind of legacy going forward is here with all of us in this room. I'll start with Ward. The international kind of practice, right, of bringing students from Belgium and communicating. Moji always went and traveled and learned so much from going to another place. Could you talk a little bit about kind of your experiences and connection with that important process in learning how to deal with cities?
Well, I think that there is something very important in being an outsider. It's a perspective that has an advantage. Obviously, there's many disadvantages, but there is a very strong quality in it. The urban design program is centered around this kind of last semester that you're kind of sent out in the world as the disciples of the school to practice urban design in an almost professional way, to deal with quite difficult clients that you have to define yourself. And that model is something that has intrigued me. I had the chance to do similar things with the school of Leuven in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And then bringing students back to New York was something that immediately spoke to Mojdeh as an opportunity, because she understands the value of what these students can bring. I mean, there's a lot of hard work that's been put in. So she asked us actually to present to New Yorkers, students at this school, after like 2 weeks in Brooklyn, our story of Brooklyn, which puts a big, I would say, quality a label that students had to reach. It's a bit of stress, I think, but it's very productive, I would say.
I was actually struck in all of your presentations. I was actually struck in all of your conversations about a couple recurring themes. Is that better? There. I was actually struck in a number of your presentations about a couple recurring things. One, that we're all sort of educators. And I think that's one of the things that Mojdeh tried to teach us. One, to kind of foster a love of education, but also that in our roles within the disciplines of urban design and the many ways that we are manifest in them, that we are in our own way educators, and we need to kind of recognize that skill. But also the sense of self-discovery that comes through that education, and the need to kind of constantly renew that. A number of you touched on that in your presentations, and I'm wondering, in your roles today, how do you remain the outsider? How do you bring that sort of fresh perspective into your work when you're embedded in it every day? How do you continue to grow as individuals?
First of all, I think you have to go outside. It really helps to get out of your comfort zone, literally by spending time in many different ways with your subject, whether that's a site or a city or another country, doesn't matter. But I think this, there is different scales. I remember the big moment where we have the video or the film presentation in the fall semester, which is a huge moment where students have to represent the site in a medium that it's very difficult for them to do. So it's really about pushing people to represent things in ways that are out of the ordinary and are not comfortable to do so.
Michelle, what's your take?
Yeah, I agree with that. One of the things that I was talking about regarding the mobile work days is kind of born out of this idea of being outside. When you're working, it's really easy to get caught up in the process of production. In the online world, you have to publish between 8 and 20 articles per day. So it's really easy to be wherever you're based out of, just to stay there. But the nature of what we do is about discovering new places. And so we had to make a very conscious decision to say, we'll work out of different neighborhoods. We have to spend 2 hours of those days walking around and showing our new writers or old writers how to notice things and how to explore the neighborhoods in an informed way. So, yeah, this going outside thing I like.
I found in my work that it's this idea of comparison might seem a little intuitive, but if you do it enough, you're able to put yourself outside. You're able to see different people's points of views, and you're able to communicate with them, knowing the exact words that you should be using to steer them towards your idea. the thing that happened recently was, as a part of my consulting work, we were working with a big company and we have a competitor. And a part of my MI City work was actually on composting and waste management. And for my luck, our competitor was actually the company that I was researching for Mojdeh's research. And I started working for the small company that is competing for their New York business. And just by sitting down and knowing who you need to talk to in DOB or city planning or who can move this product to get certified, I think that connection of being outside, I think that's what Mojdeh really did, is being able to find out what is the information you need and who's going to be able to give it to you and who's going to be able to help you actually do that to get to that final point. It was always about a final point, although the dialogue was always going.
And to also not be afraid to have that conversation that we talked about, both on the street with random strangers, but also not afraid to contact people that you might think are too high up and don't have time for you, because a lot of times they will respond. And just taking that risk to do that, even if it's not really a risk, just stepping out of your comfort zone a little bit. And having real conversations, not just like, hey, what do you think of this? But like really probing into what they know about and how that can help inform your design process, I think.
And that's a little bit of what happened with our trip to Kauai. That, you know, all of a sudden she disappeared for like 2 weeks and she left us alone trying to organize all that. And we were like 2 recently graduates trying to meet the mayor of this island and trying to, you know, make him understand what our thoughts on the island were, you know, and we were nobody to, you know, tell the mayor that what we thought. So, you know, it was always, you know, trying to push you forward and trying to reach your limit of shameless.
I think if I can add to that, we're very young and very fresh, and we come to, in my office, the Department of City Planning. There was a latest crisis, doesn't matter what, but I was called to work on something that was kind of bigger than what I was used to, and it was very interesting how your enthusiasm to do so helped me go through and actually engage with people that are in very high ranks. But I learned so much from that. You know, you put yourself out there, you step forward, and you're not afraid. You don't know less, maybe, or maybe you do, but you don't want to show it that you learn. You know less. But I think it's a very good experience to go out there and put yourself out there.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a really important point. You know, Billie sort of said in the last round of presentations that Mojdeh said, never, never give up. But another kind of key thing that I think she taught all of us was that you have to start. And it's something that, you know, dealing with complex issues and complex situations, it's very hard. But the idea of kind of what is the urging issue that you want to take on, or what's the kind of brave thing that you kind of have the unmitigated gall to do at stage is really a big question for all of us. So it's great to see all of your work and the way that you're starting. You're never giving up.
I think another point to the round robin point is that we continue to see each other periodically all the time and to have a conversation. And I think that's that heritage of bringing 60, 90, and I hope it will be more professionals in every month or every 3 weeks. And we keep on like touching base a lot of the time. It keeps us very fresh to what people are actually doing in the field. So you're not in your silo of your work all the time. That breeding ground of professionals is very important.
We call that group the Mojdeh's Kids.
Yeah. Mojdeh's Kids. I think one of the other comments that was sort of threaded through everybody's remarks, and some of you actually stated it, was this notion of open-ended experimentation or non-scientific experimentation. And Justin, to sort of put you on the spot a little bit in this group, I mean, you've been a collaborator of Mojdeh's for more years than I can remember, maybe even more than you can remember. But how do you, I mean, in terms of approaching problems as someone who is involved in all of those kind of roles that I think Mojdeh was encouraging all of us to take on, how do you foster that sense of open-ended experimentation?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the kind of the backstory is that Mojdeh caught me when I was 18 years old. So I've you know, been fully formed in some ways, and the open experimentation is definitely kind of this idea of really feeling at the end of the day that you can make things work better, right? You know, it's kind of a little bit, you know, rose-colored glasses. What can you do to make cities better? How can you make the world more just? How can you make the city kind of function in a way that makes sense? And kind of knowing that there are many reasons why it doesn't. The idea of the kind of the open experiment or the test or the kind of pushing or urging to try something different in a way is really based on this idea of kind of taking kind of small steps, right? You have to try something. You have to ask someone a question. You have to connect with other people. And I think in a lot of ways, Mojdeh's way of operating, you know, she was the original Google or whatever, right? You would go and you would pre-Google, you would ask Mojdeh and she could sort of connect you to things. And, you know, finding a way that you take on the responsibility that you have to be your own Google, right? And think about how do you connect things, how do you make the links and see the things that other people won't, is really, I think, the real challenge and the kind of basis that we all can sort of have learned to incorporate into our way of working and our way of either being professional or just being, at the end of the day, human beings that are trying to relate to other people or to collaborate to get something done. So I think that kind of, you know, responsibility is something that she really kind of challenged, and by example, she sort of showed that you can, you know, have 800 balls juggled in the air at the time, and it's okay that you don't catch, you know, 793 of them. But I think the ambition to do that and the interest to do that was a key part of the work, and it's a foundation for what I think most people that are successfully practicing urban design have been able to do.
How many people have gone through the program here?
How many people have gone through the program at Columbia, Richard? Hundreds, obviously. I mean, it's a global network.
I mean, it is kind of amazing to think. I mean, obviously, this isn't the only institution Mojdeh taught at, and we saw the graphic earlier of places in which studios have been done and so forth, and there's kind of numbers of connections. I mean, what comes out of this is that there's a kind of blueprint, if you will, for how to approach urban problems that is instilled in everybody who's gone through the program here, and I think who has taken courses with her at other institutions and so forth. That is, I think, a very powerful network to tap into, and an extension of that incredibly diverse experience that everyone went through on a kind of micro level in the studios. And I think that one of the things that really comes through in the presentation, and knowing a little bit about this place over the years, is how similar the studios are, but yet completely independent and completely different, and exploring radically different issues, completely different exercises and everything, but there is a continuity to her pedagogy that comes through in all of the studios, and I think comes through in all the students.
And I think speaking about the open exploration and her legacy as a teacher, something that I will remember as a profound turning point in my education was that at the same time, while I was in the fall semester, I was teaching with her and another TA in the New York Paris program. And I was like, I've never taught before. I don't really know what I'm doing. And she's like, oh, that's okay. They don't know that you don't know what you're doing. And so she's like, just the most important thing, like she was saying, is to really know what they're interested in. And it's like, it's not about your agenda. It's not about our syllabus, even though that helps us guide a course. It's trying to figure out what these 12 people are really interested in, and figuring out how that can be successful in their projects. And then thinking about that when we went back to our urban design projects, it was something like oh, now it's not like just asking the professors, is this good, kind of, it's like, this is what I want to do, and I'm going this direction, and how can you help me get there, kind of, and now taking that into professional life and as an educator in the future, like, I think that means so much to really get to know your own trajectory is kind of what you were saying too.
No, I'd like to add that I think you're touching on a very important point in the pedagogy, this idea of tapping into self-creating energy, because once you get into that interest, it's amazing how much time people are willing to put into things. To the extent that it gets dangerous physically for, I mean, we all know that. But I think this is really one of the key points that hasn't maybe not been stressed very much in the presentations.
Great.
Thank you, guys.
So thank you, everyone. We will have a very quick 10-minute break for refreshments and restrooms. So we should be back here 3:20 to start, but on the screen we'll be also having these short remarks from different people from different places, highlighted by the different screen transitions. So if you are around, have a look at the messages that were sent to the event. Thank you.